The Judiciary Committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time, and the clerk will call the roll to establish a quorum.
Mr. Smith?
Present.
Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Coble? Mr. Gallagly? Mr. Goodlatte? Mr. Lundgren? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Issa? Mr. Pence? Mr. Forbes? Mr. King? Mr. Franks? Mr. Gomert? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Poe? Mr. Chaffetz? Mr. Griffin? Mr. Marino? Mr. Gowdy? Mr. Ross? Ms. Adams? Mr. Quayle? Mr. Amade? Mr. Conyers? Mr. Berman? Mr. Nadler? Mr. Scott? Mr. Watt? Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Waters? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Pierluisi? Mr. Quigley? Ms. Chu? Mr. Deutsch? Ms. Sanchez? Mr. Polis?
We know where Ted Poe is.
Not enough.
Yeah, that's right.
Gentleman from Ohio. Gentleman from Arizona. Thank you, Ben. The gentleman from Colorado. Gentlewoman from California. Okay, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, 13 members responded present.
Okay, a working quorum is present. We have a number of bills that we are going to consider today. I believe all of them are basically non-controversial and bipartisan. And we'll start with some private immigration bills that we will consider en bloc. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 823 for the relief of Maria Carmen Castro Ramirez and J. Refugio Carino Rojas, H.R. 316 for the relief of Esther Caringi, H.R. 794 for the relief of Alan Bowler Kelly, H.R. 357 for the relief of Karina De Chulip Terchingovic, H.R. 824 for the relief of Daniel Wachira, and H.R. 1857 for the relief of Bartoszy Kumor. For purposes of markup and without objection, the bills will be considered en bloc, and the clerk will report the bills.
H.R. 823 for the relief of Maria Carmen Castro Ramirez and J. Refugio Carreno
Without-
Rojas.
Considered as read, I'll recognize myself for an opening statement. I support the passage of these 6 private immigration bills. Each of them conforms to the Judiciary Committee's policies for private bills and represents a legitimate effort to grant extraordinary relief. Private bills offer narrow relief to specific individuals. When a private bill is referred to the Judiciary Committee, we have the ability to ask the Department of Homeland Security for a report on any information that might affect our judgment of whether to move the bill forward. With respect to these 6 bills, DHS has not reported any negative information about the individuals the bills benefit. Each of these individuals has a compelling story that justifies the committee granting them the relief provided for in these bills. For example, one of the individuals was abandoned to die as an infant on a Nairobi trash heap. Another came to the U.S. to care for a fiancé who became a quadriplegic after being struck by a drunk driver. Private bills are extraordinary remedies and should be reserved for rare circumstances. These bills meet that test, and I urge my colleagues to support them. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee, is recognized for her statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, we are marking up these 6 private immigration bills. Most of the bills are familiar to us. In fact, the House passed 2 of them in the 110th Congress, but they did not become law because of the Senate's failure to take them up at the time. Those 2 bills, along with 3 others that we'll be considering today, were reintroduced in the 111th Congress, and as you've noted, the subcommittee voted to request ICE to prepare reports. Although the House and Senate were able to work together toward the end of that Congress to break a log jam and enact 2 private immigration laws, we were not able to get to these bills. The 6th bill we'll consider today, the only one that was introduced for the first time in this Congress, was introduced by Ranking Member Conyers. The bill meets several of our past precedents, and he may wish to describe it in detail. In the interest of time, however, I will simply incorporate the remarks that I've previously made in support of each of the bills we'll consider today. I do want to make one point about private immigration bills. One of the most important values served by such bills is they help us identify problems in the laws that must be fixed. One such problem is the rigid age cutoff contained in the Immigration and Nationality Act for international adoptions. Under current law, an adoption must be finalized before a child turns 16 in order for the child to qualify for legal status in the United States. The only exception to this is in the case of adopting the sibling of such a child, in which case the cutoff is 18 years of age. It doesn't make sense to have 2 different age cutoffs. It just creates confusion. Moreover, this committee regularly considers and passes private immigration bills to help children who, through no fault of their own or their adoptive parents, miss the more stringent age cutoff of 16. In such cases, although the child has been legally adopted by U.S. citizen parents, he or she cannot legally remain with his or her parents in the United States. In the last Congress, Chairman Smith and I introduced H.R. 5532, the International Adoption Harmonization Act of 2010. The bill passed the House by voice vote, but was never taken up in the Senate. It was a good bill that would have harmonized the adoption requirements by setting a uniform cutoff of 18. Instead, Congress enacted a bill introduced by Senator Klobuchar that accomplished some of the good goals of our bill, but left in place the one discrepancy that I've discussed. I mention H.R. 5532 only because it illustrates some of the public good that can come from the private bill process. Year after year, we hear heart-wrenching stories about children who will be separated from their parents without a private immigration bill because the parents were unable to finalize the adoption before the kids turned 16. Two of the beneficiaries of the bills before us, Alan Kelly and Bart Kumar, fall into that category. The bill that Mr. Smith and I introduced would have eliminated the need to consider such bills in the future because it would have set a new requirement based on what we've learned through reviewing so many of these cases. This may be an issue for us to revisit in light of the individual cases that keep coming before us, and with that I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Laughlin. Without objection, the Chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee statement will be made a part of the record, as will the ranking member of the full committee statement. Reporting quorum being present, the question is on reporting the bills in block favorably to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it, and the bills are reported favorably. With that, we report the single amendment in the nature of a substitute, and staff is authorized to make technical conforming changes. Have 2 days to submit views. We will now go to H.R. 3120, the Student Visa Reform Act. Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 3120, the Student Visa Reform Act, for purposes of markup, and the clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 3120, to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act to require accreditation.
Without objection, the bill will recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Laughlin, to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. And the clerk will report that amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our student visa program, known as the F-Visa, has a long and proud history. For decades, it has helped American colleges and universities attract some of the brightest young minds in the world while offering those students the opportunity to study in the world's leading institutions of higher education. The benefits to our country have been great. The inclusion of leading students from all over the world has expanded and enriched the educational experiences for all students involved, and by immersing foreign students in American culture, the program often creates a lasting and favorable understanding of our country that pays dividends in foreign countries for years to come. Unfortunately, some colleges and universities have been undermining the laudable mission of this visa program. Last year, Immigration and Custom Enforcement took down 2 schools in California, the International Technological University in San Jose and Tri-Valley University in Pleasanton, after they were found to have engaged in widespread visa fraud and exploitation of students. Among other things, the schools were found to have sponsored many students without requiring that they actually take courses. They also misled students as to the school's accreditation and the ability of students to transfer credits to accredited institutions. Commonly known as visa mills, these institutions took enormous sums of money from their students but provided questionable academic courses and essentially worthless degrees. To prevent this type of fraud in the future, H.R. 3120 requires that colleges and universities be accredited in order to host foreign students. Such accreditation would need to be given by a regional or national accrediting agency recognized by the Secretary of Education. Schools that are not currently accredited are given 3 years to acquire such accreditation so long as they apply for accreditation within 1 year. Moreover, to prevent other types of academic institutions from committing fraud, the bill also provides the Secretary of DHS with the discretion to provide that other institutions similarly be accredited. Secretary would be authorized to require accreditation in cases where an appropriate accrediting body exists and the institution seeks to host 25 or more foreign students. Seminaries and other religious institutions would be exempt from this requirement. This bill follows in the footsteps of a bill sponsored by Representative Barney Frank and Chairman Smith last Congress that requires the accreditation of language training programs before they can host foreign students. That bill was enacted on December 14, 2010, and has already helped DHS crack down on fraud in language training programs. This bill would do the same. By requiring that visas for foreign students only be granted where a school is accredited, H.R. 3120 will prevent illegitimate institutions from cheating foreign students who legitimately seek a bona fide education in the United States. In addition, this requirement will prevent fly-by-night institutions from engaging in student visa fraud to smuggle or traffic persons into the country. Finally, I've worked with Chairman Smith on an amendment to further strengthen the bill in light of recent concerns that have come to our attention. That amendment would provide a provision to prevent certain persons from owning or running an academic institution that seeks to host foreign students. Persons would be barred if they have been convicted of human trafficking, transportation for illegal sexual activity, alien smuggling or harboring, or visa fraud under the student visa program. The amendment would also give additional flexibility to the Secretary of DHS with respect to schools that are playing by the rules and trying to get accreditation but may be running into bureaucratic delays. Specifically, the Secretary is given the ability to waive the accreditation requirement in cases where a college, university, or language training program is otherwise in compliance with the law and is taking good faith steps to obtain accreditation. I thank the Chairman for bringing this bill up for consideration and for working with me to improve and strengthen the bill. I would urge my colleagues to support the bill and the amendment, and if the Chairman wishes to somehow consolidate magically the amendment and the bill, I would certainly welcome that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Loughran. We're going to do a couple of things. First of all, without objection, the amendment will be considered as read and a part of the base text. Secondly, I associate myself with the gentlewoman's remarks and think that she has accurately described her amendment in the nature of a substitute, and without objection, I'll put my entire statement in the record. I do think we will need to go on and vote separately on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. So the question is on the Loughran amendment in the nature of a substitute. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Opinion Chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If not, a reporting quorum being present, the question is on reporting the bill as amended favorably to the House. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill as amended is ordered reported favorably. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporating the amendment adopted. Staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Members will have 2 days to submit their views. Thank you all. That's 2 down. We have a couple more to go. We'll now go to the, are we ready to? Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 1860, the Digital Goods and Services Tax Fairness Act of 2011, for purposes of markup, and the clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 1860, to promote neutrality, simplicity, and fairness in the taxation of digital goods and digital services. In the House of Representatives, May 12th.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I'll recognize myself for an opening statement. Daniel Webster once said that an unlimited power to tax involves necessarily the power to destroy. Government needs revenue to fund services necessary to protect life, liberty, and property. But state tax policy should not destroy innovation and creativity. Today we live in a digital world. 20 years ago, if I wanted to listen to a Lyle Lovett song, I would have to go to the local record store downtown to buy a vinyl album to play on my turntable. Now I can sit in the comfort of my living room and purchase a music file to play instantly on my computer. The trend toward digital goods extends beyond music. In 2011, Amazon announced that for the first time, it sold more e-books over its Kindle platform than hardcover books, and it expects that trend to continue. Even services are becoming digitized. More consumers and small businesses are using cloud computing to give employees access to data from anywhere in the world. In addition to consumer convenience, digital goods and services benefit commerce and improve efficiency. Digitization has allowed small businesses to expand their markets beyond local communities without expensive transportation costs. Digital goods involve little to no reproduction cost, so they are less expensive than their tangible counterparts. And downloadable music files have a much lighter carbon footprint than the vinyl records of the past. The fact that consumers increasingly prefer to consume goods and services in digital rather than tangible form should not prompt states to impose unfair taxes. State and local sales taxes should apply equally to goods or services, regardless of the form in which they are consumed. Last year, I introduced the Digital Goods and Services Tax Fairness Act of 2011 with Mr. Cohen, the ranking member of the Court's Commercial and Administrative Law Subcommittee, and Mr. Coble, the chairman of that subcommittee. This bill prohibits states from imposing a higher tax on digital goods and services than they impose on tangible goods and services. It also provides a uniform framework to determine where a transaction that involves digital goods takes place. This legislation is consistent with the principles of the Internet Tax Freedom Act, which prohibits multiple or discriminatory taxation on e-commerce. I am concerned that without a federal guidepost, states will impose burdensome and confusing taxes on digital goods that will put American innovation at a competitive disadvantage relative to the rest of the world. I'm grateful for the support of members of this committee, their support for this legislation, and encourage my colleagues to vote for it. Our chairman of the subcommittee is not present, so we'll go to the ranking member of the Administrative Law Subcommittee. Oh, I'm sorry, we'll go to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Conyers, first for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Members of the committee, this is a good bill that could be and perhaps should be made better. Our committee has spent valuable time considering legislation that would help state and local governments facilitate their efforts to dig themselves out of the lingering effects of an economic downturn. Such as on the online sales tax idea is very important. And according to state and local governments, my friends, H.R. 1860 would reduce future state and local government revenues and therefore push these entities further into economic distress. So rather than pushing our local governments further into debt, we should do the opposite. I recommend to your attention the Main Street Fairness Act, for example, which was introduced by myself earlier in the Congress, and there are some other similar approaches. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to put my full statement in the record and yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, the gentleman's full statement will be made a part of the record, and thank you, Mr. Conyers. We'll go now to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, the ranking member of the Courts, Commercial, and Administrative Law Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as the ranking member of the Courts Committee, I am extremely proud of the Supreme Court and Justice Roberts today for upholding the rule of law. Ever since I became a member of Congress, I have consistently favored easing state and local tax burdens that threaten to impede consumers' access to the burgeoning digital economy. To that end, I've supported making permanent a prohibition on discriminatory state and local Internet access taxes and have backed a temporary moratorium on discriminatory state and local taxation of wireless communication services. H.R. 1860, the Digital Goods and Service Tax Fairness Act of 2011, is of a piece with these other measures, and I'm proud to have the chairman, Mr. Smith, and the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Coble, who are my friends, as co-sponsors. This legislation, of which I am the lead Democratic co-sponsor, creates a single national framework to govern the taxation of digital commerce by state and local jurisdictions, eliminating inconsistency and confusion for consumers and businesses. Importantly, the Act prohibits state and local jurisdictions from imposing multiple or discriminatory taxes on the sale or use of digital goods and services, making sure those digital goods and services are not taxed differently than any other form of good or service. This prohibition is helpful in ensuring that consumers, and particularly low-income consumers, have access to innovative digital goods and services. Under the framework established under 1860, state and local jurisdictions can only impose taxes on retail sales of digital goods or services and limits the imposition of those taxes to a customer or a seller. This ensures digital goods and services are not taxed during multiple stages of a digital sales transaction, particularly for acts or instruments that merely facilitate the sale itself. H.R. 1860 also determines the appropriate taxing jurisdiction by limiting the authority to the jurisdiction encompassing the customer's tax address. This will ensure customers are not taxed by multiple states. As I've said in previous hearings on the subcommittee that has held on state taxation issues, we've had hearings on those, I'm not unmindful of the concerns of state and local taxing authorities with respect to Congress's intervention in state and local taxation issues. Many states and localities have struggling economies, resulting in a reduction in those jurisdictions' tax revenues. It is understandable public officials in those localities would oppose any measure that limits their ability to tax. Congress certainly ought to be careful intervening in state and local tax matters and do so sparingly, but should let justice come first. That being said, these broader national policies concerning overriding the traditional deferences Congress has shown toward those localities are overridden when justice is the primary concern. Congress has permission to intervene in these circumstances. I can think of no better example of when that case is true than with respect to the multiple, discriminatory, and disparate tax treatment of digital goods and services, a fast-moving, borderless marketplace across the state and national boundaries thousands and perhaps millions of times a day. H.R. 1860 addresses a clear need for a uniform national framework for determining which jurisdictions can tax goods and services under what circumstances. I applaud House Judiciary Committee Chairman Lamar Smith, a distinguished gentleman and a great jurist, for introducing H.R. 1860, a great day for bipartisanship, and for the leadership he's shown on this issue going back to the previous Congress. I also thank Subcommittee Chairman Coble for his co-sponsorship, the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the 24 Democrats who have joined with me in co-sponsoring this bill, including 6 on this committee. Ideologically, they represent a cross-section of my party, from some of the most moderate to some of the more progressive. The broad spectrum of support just within the Democratic caucus speaks to the reasonableness and wide appeal of this bill. Kumbaya, a bipartisan bill. Hooray for America. Let's move forward. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Corn, and thank you, too, for those expansive remarks. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that H.R. 1860 was introduced to impose a framework on how states and local governments should tax the online sales of digital goods and services. Along these lines, this is why I am a co-sponsor of a related bill, H.R. 3179, the Marketplace Equity Act. Online commerce has created many benefits for customers as well as challengers. Whether it is downloading an application for your tablet or buying a television from Amazon.com online, commerce is a dynamic industry with a very real impact on the retail marketplace and state and local governments that operate based on sales and use taxes. While on concept, I agree that states and local governments should not discriminate against the sale of digital goods, I would rather state and local governments work with industry to propose a framework that works for everyone, since we do not yet have consensus among key stakeholders regarding the impact of this bill. I simply must oppose. In a letter sent to the committee from the National Governors Association, they note that the model for states and industry working together to solve complex state issues is the Mobile Telecommunications Sourcing Act. This law was written together by states and industry to resolve the questions of when and how states could tax mobile phone service. The NGA is concerned that states were not consulted in like manner during the drafting of H.R. 1860. Mr. Chairman, I believe we're all committed to sound tax policy that respects state sovereignty while providing certainty for taxpayers. However, I think this legislation should be given further consideration as the states and industry continue to develop a workable compromise. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Would the gentlelady yield to me,
Yes,
please?
I yield to the gentleman from...
First of all, I wanted to commend you on your statement, because I think I hear in your remarks that we could do more to improve this bill, to move it in the right direction. That's all we're saying. And adding a nexus standard and addressing some of these vague definitions wouldn't do any harm to this measure, but it would make it more easily for more of us to support.
Yes.
And I thank the gentlelady for her presentation and for yielding to me.
Thank you.
And does
You'll
it-
back the balance of my
Thank you, Mr. Waters. Gentleman from California, Mr. Berman, is recognized.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand one aspect of this bill. And I'm wondering if either the chair or Mr. Cohn, the gentleman from Tennessee, could answer the question. And this sounds like a bill I want to support because it decides where the tax should be collected on a uniform scale, and that makes sense. And it prohibits discriminatory treatment, and that makes sense. The one specific example that's been sent to me by local governments and that are opposing this bill is the following, and that when you buy a hotel room, you book a hotel room or other kinds of reservations online through one of the discount travel companies, the discount travel company gets those rooms at wholesale prices and then understandably adds some amount of money which they charge the consumer. It still may be less than what would happen if you contacted the hotel directly to reserve, and that's fine. And the fact that they charge something extra than the wholesale price is the only way they could function, so that makes sense. But the question of what is the tax rate you pay, and that discriminatory tax treatment is defined in this bill as requiring the tax be on the wholesale rate rather than on the rate charged to the customer, it just raises an issue of is that accurate? Is that claim accurate? And
would the gentleman from-
if so, what is the
Would the gentleman from California
justification for
yield?
making that determination?
Okay, the gentleman from California.
Happy to yield.
We also saw or received a copy of the same letter that caught your attention and that was delivered to us yesterday. All I can say to you is that our respective states share the same view, and we intend to address that after markup and before we go to the House floor. So when we have time to come up with a precise solution, we are going to do so.
Well, this letter is dated June 27th, which is not a long time before today. So I understand that. But are you telling me that you see a serious question here which you want to try to resolve
That is
fairly?
correct. That is correct.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Because I share your concern. I didn't think that the bill did that, but if it does, I would like to associate myself with the remarks of the chairman. We should fix it.
We want to clarify and make sure that we don't get tripped up on that.
All right, let me put this is just the most important cities in the country, the ones in California. A letter from the League of California Cities dated June 27th, 2012. Can I just include that letter?
At objection,
in the
that
record?
letter will be made a part of the record. The gentleman yields back the balance of his time, and the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to inquire and take you at your word. My support for the bill is a long overdue national framework for this very difficult, complex system of technology and online purchases, individuals who can be in different places and reside in one state but are purchasing something in another state. I frankly think we owe it to those who produce goods a sense of order and a sense of correctness. However, as the gentlelady from California and my distinguished ranking member has said, that why not make a good bill a better bill? So, Mr. Chairman, I would ask, and as you well know, we both come from the same state that has offered some commentary on this very point. I would like this bill to draw massive support on the floor of the House. I think it can. And I'd like those who have written a June 27th letter to know that I've taken note of it. But, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to inquire, can we who have co-sponsored this bill work with the issues that have been cited, in particular dealing with lost revenue and some other items as it goes to the floor? Will we be able to, for those who are of particular interest in the legislation, be able to see that product before we go to the floor? I yield to the chairman.
The answer is yes, and as I mentioned to Mr. Berman, I recognize that we may need to clarify some aspects of the bill. We'll continue to work with all members between now and the House floor. I also want to say that I have a manager's amendment that will also address some of the concerns that have been raised.
All right. Reclaim my time then, Mr. Chairman. With that in mind, I'm particularly hoping the ranking member, whose wisdom we all value, will have the input necessary in this particular legislation. And I yield back.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Jackson-Lee. I'll recognize myself for the purpose of offering a manager's amendment, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1860, offered by Mr. Smith of Texas. Strike all after the enacting clause.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read and consider the base
May
text
we get a copy
for
of it?
purposes of the amendment. And, I'm told it's in the back of the materials that have been distributed, but we'll make sure that everybody has a copy before we proceed.
Thank you.
I'll recognize myself for a statement on the amendment. Now, this amendment makes both substantive and technical changes to the bill in light of some concerns expressed by state and local taxing authorities. The Court's Commercial and Administrative Law Subcommittee's hearing on the base bill last year prompted discussions among taxing authorities, industry, and committee staff. Last summer, Republican and Democratic committee staff held a 7-hour meeting with stakeholders to work on ways to improve this bill. At that meeting, the Federation of Tax Administrators, FTA, raised some concerns about unintended consequences that might arise from language in the bill. Their input was helpful. It is in everyone's interest to have clear language to prevent costly litigation. This amendment responds to many of the FTA's concerns. It strikes the provision that allows challenges under the bill to be brought in federal court. Those lawsuits will now need to be brought in state court. It also delays the effective date of the bill to give tax administrators time to implement its provisions. And it clarifies technical language to eliminate or at least minimize unintended consequences. There is broad support on this committee for the base text of the bill. Nevertheless, we worked with state and local governments to try to address their concerns. This amendment addresses many of them, but if concerns remain even after this markup, we will consult with Ranking Member Conyers and other co-sponsors to address them. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, the ranking member of the full committee, is recognized for his statement on the amendment.
Chairman Smith and members of the committee, this amendment in the nature of a substitute makes much needed changes and is a good first step to improving the bill. For example, it clears up definitions about what is a discriminatory tax. And it also adds clear language ensuring that states can retain the right to collect a use tax from consumers who purchase digital goods or services from remote sellers. And thanks to our staff negotiations, we're striking Section 6 from the introduced bill, which created a lot of heartache for state and local government groups, to be candid with you. But what isn't here, and we could use some discussion on it, is a nexus standard. That's still missing. And I'm trying to avoid prolonging this by introducing such an amendment. And there are still several vague definitions that are not technical in nature or procedural, they're substantive. And I'm looking to hear from our chairman as to how this is going to be dealt with, without these matters being addressed. And even though he doesn't want me to, I yield to Chairman Smith.
Highly technical keyboard.
Okay. Let me reassure the gentleman, as I have the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman, a minute ago, that this is a highly technical bill. We will continue to work with the gentleman and make sure that we clarify any language that needs to be clarified before we go beyond markup today. We'll continue to try to address his concerns.
But could you say anything at all about the nexus standard, Mr. Chairman? Is it completely out of disfavor from your point of view, or is there some small amount of redeeming merit in it, or
the gentleman will
just
yield.
where do we come in on the scale on this? I yield.
The bill does not concern the nexus issues that you have mentioned. Nevertheless, once again, if we need to clarify language, we will. But I do believe the gentleman's concerns are legitimate, but ultimately can be and will be addressed.
Well, I could see I'm not going to get much further with this dialogue, and I feel that we've worked together across the years.
We will continue
even
to
before you were chairman, and with the coming months, even if you may not remain the chairman, I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Conyers. Mr. Conyers, you and a couple of other members have alluded to indirectly or specifically mentioned another bill introduced by our colleague, Mr. Womack, and that is the bill that includes some of the nexus issues that you have just mentioned. We do have a hearing on that bill scheduled for the end of July, or at least sometime in July, and so a lot of those issues that you were concerned about, we can address at that hearing.
Very good. But can we mark this bill up as soon as we can? Maybe sooner than the end of July. We'll be back after a week, and I would urge that we see where we're going on this as early as we can, sir.
Okay. I thank the gentleman for his comments.
Could I have get unanimous consent to enter in the National Association of Counties, League of Cities, Conference of Mayors, a letter directed to you and myself?
Without objection, that letter will be made a part of the record.
In addition, we have the labor opposition to this measure clearly outlined, dated June 26th. And the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, dated May 12th, May 29th, 2012, which discusses the potential impairing of funding for education, health care, and other state and local services.
Okay. Without objection, those additional documents will be made a part of the record.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Are there any amendments to the amendment?
Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman, let me recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, and then we'll recognize the gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Chairman, I have, I think, 2 amendments at the desk. You don't? I don't. Okay, we'll go to him next. Okay, and maybe I'll get 2 amendments at the desk.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. We'll recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Mr. Chairman, I have 1 amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Polis of Colorado to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1860. In Section 3E1.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman from Colorado is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I generally agree with the sentiments of this bill. In writing these sorts of bills, obviously we need to be very careful about words and how they can be interpreted. And there's an additional to some of the areas that have already been discussed. I wanted to direct everybody's attention on page 4 to the description of how a tax liability can be divided between effectively bundled goods or combined goods. And the current language in E1 on page 4 again says that if charges for digital goods or digital services are aggregated with and not separately stated from other goods or services, namely goods that are not digital goods or digital services as defined in this bill, then the charges may be taxed, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a carve-out that says unless the seller can reasonably identify the charges for the digital goods or digital services from its books or records kept in the regular course of business. And my amendment strikes that. We're certainly open to another solution, and I'm going to use an illustrative example of why the current language doesn't work. And I'm going to use an example of the iPhone and iPod, not because this is something that Apple has discussed with me or concerns Apple, and I don't know what Apple's opinion of the bill is. I'm using this example because the New York Times did a breakdown analysis of the various components of the iPad. They did it. It was done in discussion of trade issues. So we're drawing from where on one of these devices here, where the parts come from, how much they cost. On an iPad that retails for $300, they found that the physical components, namely a hard drive manufactured by Toshiba, display module, video multiprocessor, all those parts combined might be somewhere around $100 of the cost. An additional amount beyond that is what you might call the digital component of an iPad. Now, the intent of this bill, and certainly what I agree with, is that the apps that somebody subsequently downloads to an iPhone or iPad should be covered under this bill. The question is the digital components that are layered on top of the physical components and are inseparable from a physical purchase. And as the world becomes more and more complex, this will affect even, and it even does today, our toasters, our ovens. They are all smart. They all have a digital component, a software component. And this particular section, as written now, effectively allows the company to divide, again, with the only standard being reasonably identify their digital component from their physical or structural component and have them taxed separately. I don't think that was the intent of the bill. I understand there are some bundled digital services that we need to make sure the taxes are properly allocated, and I sympathize with that, and I think that we can find language to do that. But this current language that my amendment strikes is not the right standard. Reasonable identification of charges from the digital goods or services in books or records kept in the regular course of business. So again, under this, without any specific input, again, from Apple, just because New York Times did the breakdown, they would then be able to say, well, it's $100 or $90 of physical, it's $90 or $100 of digital, and when in fact you buy it, therefore there are two different tax rates. This also allows, because of the reasonable identifying standard, which is the only standard, it effectively allows companies to game the system and in favor of whichever tax rate may be lower, which we generally assume would be the digital tax rate. So again, my amendment is not necessarily a complete solution to bundled digital services, but at least it makes it clear and removes what could otherwise be a gaping loophole that could affect everything from toasters to televisions to ovens. And with that, I yield back.
I'll recognize myself to comment on the amendment. I would have to oppose it, not because I disagree with the direction the gentleman is going, and certainly he stated his purpose of the amendment very, very well, but because I thought the gentleman was going to offer the amendment and withdraw it. Is that not the case?
Yes, I'd be happy to withdraw it. I just wanted to clarify that we we'll be able to work on these issues and continue to work on these issues to make sure that we can avoid that as a consequence.
Thank you, Mr.
Would the
Polish.
gentleman-
Let me say, the gentleman, you got my attention, and yes, we will work on that. I
Okay.
thought you stated it very well.
I did, and I will be happy to withdraw my amendment. I did want to see if there were any other speakers on my amendment.
Would the gentleman yield?
My time is
Oh.
expired, but you can claim your time on my amendment, and then I'll withdraw it.
Okay. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I'll be very brief. I think that the gentleman's amendment has a lot of merit, and I'm glad we're going to have a chance to work on it, because as we look ahead, you're exactly right. I mean, we're now thinking one thing, but the impact is going to be considerably different in the future as the technology changes. So I appreciate not only the amendment, but the breadth that you bring to this with your background in technology. I think it's really a gift to the committee that you're able to share that perspective, and I thank the chairman for yielding, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Lofgren. Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. Thank you, Mr. Polis. Are there other amendments? The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have two amendments at the desk, but I think I'm just going to move the strike the last word and discuss them without distributing them.
Okay.
If that's all right with the chair.
That would be more than all right.
All right.
I think the clerk has to report the amendment in any case.
For me to strike the last word?
I'm told by the parliamentarian that's not the case. The clerk does not need to report the amendment. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
He's going to force me to offer him, huh?
No, we're not going to do that.
I didn't think so. I didn't think that's what the rule said. Okay, I move to strike the last word in that case, Mr.
And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the two amendments I have reflect concerns, some of which have already been raised. One is the changing technology, which we just talked about, and that would be addressed through my amendment if I were to offer it with a sunset provision on the bill. But I've been assured by the staff, and hopefully I'll be assured by the chairman, that we can have a discussion about whether there should be a sunset, what the appropriate length of that sunset should be between now and the floor. And if I can get that assurance, then I'll be happy about that.
If the gentleman will yield, yes, we will have that discussion, and the gentleman will be consulted before we go to the floor.
That's a little bit less than I had hoped for, but in terms of assurance that we might do something about it. But that's all right. I understand. You don't want to stake yourself out too far there. The other one has to do with the definition of seller on page 13. I just think in general we want to avoid any this is an area of my concern throughout this process and earlier bills that dealt with foreclosing local governments from imposing taxes even on the internet. Now on the digital products is that we don't put local brick and mortar stores in a different posture than we do people who are online. And it may be that that the definition of seller here is appropriate, but I think there needs to be some more discussion about that. And your staff has assured me once again that that will be a subject that will be open for discussion between now and the floor. And so if I can get maybe your assurance and Ms. Lofgren's assurance that that you all are still working on that, and that I can be a part of that discussion, I'd be happy.
If the gentleman will yield, that's easy to give him that reassurance, because I honestly do believe that most of us agree with the underlying purpose of the legislation, or just trying to improve the legislation, and so I would hope and expect that we would be able to satisfy the gentleman from North Carolina.
All right, that's as much or more than I might have expected on that on that prong. So I think in light of that, instead of withdrawing the amendments and, or instead of offering the amendments and having you use the power of majority to vote them down, it'd probably be in my best interest to not to offer the amendments, and so I will not do so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. White. I do appreciate that, and I think we will improve the bill more as a result of your taking that action. Are there any other amendments? The gentlewoman from California, Ms. True, is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Chu of California to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentlewoman is recognized to explain her amendment.
Mr. Chair, this amendment would require a GAO study in 3 years to determine how this law has affected state and local revenues. I'm concerned that the Digital Goods and Services Tax Fairness Act could significantly reduce state and local revenues by preempting taxation of purchases such as downloaded music, movies, and online services. With this amendment, we will know exactly how much revenue was lost as a result of this legislation. For example, I'm concerned that the measure could potentially disrupt fundamental features of state and local taxation due to undefined or vaguely defined terms likely to produce costly litigation, all at the expense of other individual and business taxpayers. As an example, the bill would define digital service in such a way as to exclude from the calculation of video franchise fee revenues generated by on-demand and pay-per-view services. With the increasing popularity of these services, the loss of these revenues would adversely affect local government budgets. These fees, based on an operator's gross revenues, are used by communities across the country for a variety of purposes, including parks, libraries, and public safety. In addition, the bill could create loopholes for savvy corporations to cherry-pick the most favorable state and local tax rates, depriving their own jurisdiction of revenue owed. Companies could purchase all of their digital goods and digital services all in one locality for tax purposes, and then distribute those goods or services to offices or subsidiaries in other locations, thus saving money for the corporation by evading tax laws. As a former mayor of a city in California and a former elected member of the California Board of Equalization, which is the state's tax board, I'm very sensitive to these issues, and I can understand why there is opposition to this bill from the National Association of Counties, the National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the International City County Management Association, the Government Finance Officers Association, the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors, and the National Governors Association. Several labor unions are also opposed, including the AFL-CIO, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the International Association of Firefighters, the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, the National Education Association, and the United Auto Workers. I also ask unanimous consent to submit their letters. Actually, some have already been submitted, but I didn't hear the National Governors Association.
Without objection, we will submit their letters. And will the gentlewoman yield? I just want to say that I support her amendment to require a GAO study, and I urge my colleagues to support your amendment as well.
Thank you. I truly appreciate that. I recognize that the chairman is at work to address the concerns within the manager's amendment, but I worry that the language may still be too vague. I believe that there is a chance for common ground and compromise that will ensure all stakeholders can get behind this legislation, and I believe my amendment will help to do that, but I urge my colleagues to come back to the table and work out an agreement on the legislation as a whole.
Thank you, Ms. Chu. The question is on the amendment to the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If not, the question is on the manager's amendment. Those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. On the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. A reporting quorum being present, the question is on reporting the bill as amended favorably to the House. Those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill as amended is ordered reported favorably. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporating amendments adopted, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Members will have 2 days to submit their views. We're going to go back very, very quickly to considering the semi-annual activity report of the committee, and pursuant to notice, I now call up the third semi-annual activity report of the Committee on the Judiciary for the 112th Congress, and the clerk will report the activity report.
Third semi-annual activity report of the Committee on the Judiciary.
Without objection, the activity report is considered as read. I ask unanimous consent that the report be transmitted to the House pursuant to Clause 1D, Rule 11 of the Rules of the House of Representatives. Without objection, the report will be so transmitted. We'll go to the last bill of the day. This is a bill sponsored by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 6019, the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant Reauthorization and the Bullying Prevention and Intervention Act for purposes of markup, and the clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 6019 to amend the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for an amendment at any point. And I'll recognize myself for an opening statement. I'm going to put my opening statement in the record and recognize the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for her opening statement.
It's you.
Is she here?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and to my colleagues, let me thank you. Let me thank the Judiciary staff, the Democratic staff, and the staff of the chairman for their courtesies and their work on this legislation. In October 18, 2010, in Houston, Texas, we had a hearing on this issue of bullying. Even though as the chair of the Congressional Children's Caucus, we've been working on issues dealing with children for a period of time, but it was eye-opening to see the sheriff, the Republican district attorney, Republicans and Democrats, local officials, and parents who called in on teleconference to speak about the epidemic of bullying. Lee Hirsch, who produced the movie Bully, documented that there are 13 million children a year that will be bullied. This legislation is a combination of bipartisan efforts, and its first order is to reauthorize the Juvenile Accountability Block Grants Reauthorization and Bullying Prevention and Intervention Act, that is the title of the bill, but it reauthorizes the Juvenile Accountability Block Grants, and as well provide grant funding to states for programs that address bullying, cyberbullying prevention and gang prevention and intervention, in addition to expressing a sense of Congress on the importance of best practices. In essence, it gives to our local communities extra added opportunity to address this indicting feature that our children have to face. My modification would ensure that not only prevention but also intervention programs are taken into account when addressing the issue of bullying, cyberbullying prevention. In addition, I encourage local communities to develop best practices that can be utilized across the nation. The Juvenile Accountability Block Grant authorized the Attorney General to make grants to states and units of local government to strengthen their juvenile justice systems and foster accountability resources on holding juveniles accountable for their actions and building up juvenile justice system. Though this is not a criminal justice or a criminal with penalties, this is not a bill that provides penalties. It is intervention, and this is allowed under the Department of Justice and under the juvenile section of the Department of Justice. This is, in fact, a documentation or an affirmation of the need to help our youth. The study of the ethics of American youth surveyed more than 40,000 high school students and has been conducted every other year that more than 40,000 high school students has been interviewed for this. The study by the nonprofit Joseph Institute of Ethics also found that 1/3 of all high school students say that violence is a big problem at their school, and nearly 1 in 4 say they do not feel very safe. In addition, the American Justice Department says that each month 1 out of every 4 kids will be abused by another. 77% of students are bullied mentally, verbally, or physically. 1 out of 5 kids admits to being a bully or doing some bullying. 8% of students miss a day because of bullies. 43% fear harassment in the bathroom, and the list goes on and on. I cite for you a number of articles, and I'll just read one of them and ask the articles be put into the record. First of all, the synopsis of the movie Bullying. I ask unanimous consent to be put into the record.
Without objection, they'll be made a part of the record.
I thank the gentleman very much. And a last statement is to mention one that many of us have mentioned or are seen, and that is the Story of a 68-year-old bus driver, Karen, in Greece, New York. She was 68 years old as a bus monitor, and she was a victim of bullying. A 68-year-old. A group of middle school children verbally abused her about her weight and age. They threatened to stab her and torture her. They called her fat and were caught on video engaging in the very behavior I believe we must address today. And so this is not a condemnation to my colleagues. It's an opportunity. And it's an opportunity to provide our local communities with their best practices efforts. And those will include district attorneys and sheriffs and chiefs of police, school districts. Many of the people who testified in the hearing that I had were members of the Board of Trustees who had experienced tragedies in their own school districts. They're seeking help. They want to work with us. And I believe this is a national statement made by a very important committee, the Judiciary Committee, that we are ready to help using the laws of this Congress and using the resources that we have at the Department of Justice. I'd ask my colleagues to support it and like to acknowledge a number of co-sponsors, including John Lewis and Mike Honda, who co-chairs the Congressional Caucus Against Bullying, and who will be holding an all-day session today.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Jackson-Lee. And also, even though I put my opening statement in the record, I do want to make it clear that I support this legislation and have co-sponsored it with the gentlewoman from Texas. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, is recognized.
I just wanted to ask unanimous consent to put my statement in the record and lament the fact that the grant has been so severely reduced. We're talking about 1/8 of the original authorization, but I support this. I'll continue to work on it to have it fully funded, and I thank the gentleman for allowing me.
Thank you, Mr. Conyers, and with that objection, your entire statement will be made a part of the record. Are there other members who wish to be recognized? If not, I'd like to entertain amendments. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, H.R. 6019, the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant Reauthorization and Bullying Prevention Intervention Act of 2012, sponsored by the gentlelady from Texas and yourself, reauthorizes the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant, or JBIG, at a level of $40 million a year for the next 5 years. It includes a provision amending the section of the law that authorizes the use of JBIG funds to address bullying in schools, and a sense of Congress encouraging best practices addressing bullying. Both of the use for bullying prevention is already an allowable use, so it is somewhat redundant. But I'm particularly disappointed in the bill that the funding level authorized in the bill, and I recognize that it reflects the current level of appropriations, but I don't think we should lock ourselves into such a low authorization level for the next 5 years. JBIC has a strong bipartisan foundation of legislation. It was authored originally authored by Crime Subcommittee Chairman Bill McCollum and myself in 1999. The bill we filed was co-sponsored by every member of the Crime Subcommittee and other members, but it did not pass in 99, but it did pass in 2002, again with the co-sponsorship of every member of the committee. That bill was reintroduced by yourself and with me as the main co-sponsor. The original level of in both bills was $500 million authorization, but when it passed, it was $350 million, and it contains a formula of distribution to effectively address juvenile delinquency to prevent children from evolving into serious criminal activity. That's why we again have filed a bill to keep the authorization at $350 million. Ironically, as we seek to bring more attention to bullying in the bill, I'm reminded that the Columbine tragedy was said to have been resulted from bullying that kids who did the shooting had suffered at the hands of classmates, and yet we focus on lowering the amounts of assistance we provide to strapped communities to address such problems as bullying. Since 1999, federal assistance to localities to address juvenile delinquency prevention has dropped by about 90%. And so while I support the bill as far as it goes, I think we need to do much more to reflect the needs of localities in dealing with juvenile justice issues, and the appropriation level of only $40 million, in my judgment, does not allow enough assistance. I yield to the gentleman from Michigan.
I merely want to indicate my support for your analysis, Ranking Member Scott, and I join you in your statement. Thank you.
Would the gentleman yield? As a sponsor of the bill, let me thank my colleagues for their commitment and passion, which equals mine. And I look forward to working with Chairman Smith as this bill makes its way to the floor to take into consideration the idea of the funding. The underlying premise of the bill is to emphasize intervention, to emphasize the national crisis of bullying, and to reauthorize the block grants. In the art of compromise, we find ourselves at $40 million, which for those of us who have been strong supporters of what the block grants can do, would clearly want the numbers to be increased. But I thank the chairman for working with me for at least establishing a presence and an amount that can grow. I hope our colleagues can work together across the aisle to raise that amount to what communities can do in expanding the services that they're giving. But I want to encourage my colleagues to support this bill and the underlying premise of the reauthorization for the $40 million per year that we can all work together to increase and improve. With that, I yield back to the gentleman.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Jackson-Lee. Are there any amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Does the gentleman from Virginia have any amendments? Okay, let me take his amendments. Let me say that we're going to need to recess for various reasons momentarily. And
I think I can offer these. They're very brief, Mr. Chairman.
okay. The clerk will report. And is the gentleman offering these amendments in block?
Mr. Chairman, I have two amendments to that's number 77 and 79, which I'd like to offer en bloc.
Okay, the clerk will report the amendments.
Amendment to H.R. 6019, offered by Mr. Scott of Virginia. Amendment to page and line numbers of the June 25th, 2012 print.
Without objection, the amendments will be considered as read, and the gentleman from Virginia is recognized to explain the amendments.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, amendment number 77 would have the sense of Congress in the bill. The bill says that you should use best practices for the purposes of bullying. It suggests that best practices is only limited to bullying. The language is changed to make it clear that best practices are expected in all cases. Number 79 retains the language in current law calling for research-based anti-bullying programs when JBIG funds are used. I think both of those are consistent with the intent of the present law and of the bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Scott. And if the gentleman will yield,
I yield.
I support.
I'd like to be able to see the amendment, Mr. Chairman, before you offer a support. As I've only seen.
I was going to say that I support these amendments. I'll wait for the gentlewoman from California to take a look, from Texas to take a look at them, but I support these amendments and urge my colleagues to support them as well. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized?
May I offer a friendly amendment, please? Friendly amendment to number 77 by indicating for the use of best practices engaged for bullying prevention and all activities which grants under part whatever it is may be used. I'd like to be consistent with the legislation and say is encouraged the use of best practices is encouraged for the prevention of bullying and for all other activities for which grants are given.
Well, it's redundant. You know, if the gentlelady is insisting that the word bullying be used another different time, it's in number 13, Amendment 79 has it as an allowable use, and it's the point of this amendment is to make it clear that best practices are to be encouraged for all activities and not single out one activity for which best practices are used. we have gone to great lengths over the course of the juvenile justice legislation to make it clear that best practices and evidence-based practices are used, not just slogans and sound bites and what may be
Well, the
best
gentleman
protocol
yield,
tested.
in the spirit of collegiality, if I could read it to you, maybe you would understand what I'm saying. Best practices is encouraged for the prevention of bullying and all other activities. I want to keep it consistent, with the legislation. I'd ask the gentleman if he would. I do not take out all activities, and I said in all other activities.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what is the legislative purpose of putting bullying there when it's one of 13 different allowable uses? To single out one suggests
it is
there
not
must be some legislative purpose to that.
If his gentleman is yielding, it is not exclusive. It is clarifying, and I think it is enhancing. And so I'd appreciate it if the gentleman would view it in that way, and his language that has all other activities remains in place.
Well, if the chairman would make it clear in the report language that this is totally duplicative and redundant and has no legislative purpose.
Is this something that we can work out on the way to the floor?
Yes, I will look forward to doing that. We can move on the amendments.
Does the gentlelady withdraw her amendment?
I do withdraw it, and I'd like to move forward on the amendments. I'd like to pass this legislation, and I'd like to encourage my colleagues to support the bill.
Does anyone else wish to speak on the Scott amendments? Okay. If not, the questions on the amendment, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Well, here's an amendment. Right, his amendment was a secondary amendment, so it's point of order. Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman. Did the amendments pass?
Well, I was asked to wait for a moment for my colleague down there. I'm just ready to ask if we can get moving here, please. We all right? Okay. The vote was called. Independent chair. The ayes have it.
No, it's his is different. Yeah.
Are there any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Okay.
Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
Okay. Okay, the clerk will report.
Amendment to H.R. 6019, offered by Mr. King of Iowa. Amendment to page and line.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I identify this as an amendment to the Scott Amendment number 79. The chair took up the Scott Amendment in preference to the King Amendment. The King Amendment does go to the Scott Amendment as adopted, but it does not strike the findings as has been reported. The amendment that's in front of you, the King Amendment, is an amendment that only strikes the language in the Scott Amendment that is also was in the underlying bill and replaced identically and verbatim by the Scott Amendment. And these are the words that would be struck by the King Amendment to the Scott Amendment, which is, quote, as well as intervention programs regarding bullying, close quote. And, Mr. Chairman, this amendment is about eliminating the language which creates federal programs and expands existing federal programs. I have supported this legislation in the past when it passed out of this committee and off the floor in 2005. I support this legislation today as a reauthorization, but I think everybody in this Congress knows that we can't be expanding the scope of government. The Supreme Court has taken care of that today for us. But we have with bullying, thank you for the smile to the ranking member from Michigan, but what we have is with bullying, I believe that bullying has almost become a human universal. It exists in every society and every civilization from the dawn of humanity and the dawn of time. And we can and should stigmatize the bullies and destigmatize their victims. We've come a long ways with those and made some progress with those programs. The tragedies that have taken place across the country and the tragedies that have taken place in my neighborhood are stark and they are painful, and anyone in this Congress opposes bullying. But one of the things that's been taking place is the federal government has grown beyond its scope. What I have seen is this. I've sat down with a whole series of teachers and said, do you need a federal program to address bullying? I've not found one teacher that has said that. My wife has taught 2 generations of kindergartners, and her friends in that list of people that flow in that culture and civilization say, no, we don't need the federal government intervening. Each one is an individual case, and we can take care of these individual cases within our schools if we have a good superintendent, a good principal, a good teacher, and even better yet, if we have cooperative parents. For the federal government to intervene and create intervention programs between parents, teachers, parents, principals, and superintendents, schools, and school boards is irresponsible on our part to think that we can step into these schools and create programs. And I went further, and I met with a significant number of the State Board of Education just on Monday night, and I asked them, do you need more tools from the federal government? Do you need us to create more programs to deal with bullying in the schools? Their answer was, we have a law, we have some federal help to guide us, we have a state law, and we require every school district to establish an anti-bullying program within their school district, and we believe is it effective, and we believe that we can address this without the federal government, and we just as soon not have the federal government intervene in the relationships between the State Board of Education, our superintendents, our principals, our teachers, our parents, our families, and our communities. This is an unnecessary federal intervention. It's an expansion of the authorization that we established here in 2005 in good faith and good conscience. And this is an example also of what happens when the federal government sticks the nose of its camel under the tent. Someone comes along and slips a little subtle language in there that reaches the federal government into our schools. And now, if my amendment does not succeed here, and when it's end up with real authorization that becomes law, you will see this little innocuous language that says, as well as intervention programs regarding bullying. That little innocuous language becomes an intervention program that identifies and perhaps also profiles young people as likely to be bulliers and under the direction and potential punishment of some federal government program. We can't raise children at the guidelines of the federal government. We can do so if the parents are involved most. We can do so if the local government is involved, local school systems are involved. But if there was ever anything that was outside the scope of the vision of our founding fathers, one of them certainly was keeping the federal government out of the relationship between parents, students, teachers, principals, administrators. And so I urge the adoption of this amendment, which just simply allows the underlying legislation to be reauthorized within the scope of its original intent in 2005 and within the scope that it came before this committee. I support the passage of this bill and its reauthorization in its original form, and I urge adoption of my amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. King. Are there any other members that wish to speak on the amendment? Yes, Ms. Jackson.
I vigorously oppose the gentleman's amendment, and I thank the committee, and I thank Chairman Smith for...
Excuse me, the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank Chairman Smith for the work that we've done together and his opposition to Mr. King's amendment. This, in fact, as my colleagues have just said to me, guts the bill. This is not in any way to distract away from local and state jurisdiction. In fact, this is enhancement. It is well acknowledged that we are living in different times from even the time of the most recent reauthorization of this block grant. And we work very hard in listening to testimony from people all over the country on the victimization and the tragedies that have occurred with respect to what is a term that is not of yesteryear. It is not the schoolyard fight. It is more difficult than that. And what we are encouraging is that to highlight for school districts and states and local municipalities working with juveniles, best practices, intervention, not to the exclusion of any other utilization of the block grant. We work very hard to narrow the language. This legislation is not recent in coming. It has vast support and its underlying premise is, again, to enhance and reauthorize this funding. And as many members have critiqued, they would like it to be more. Count me in. I'd like it to be more. But colleagues, this has come about through intense cooperation and work, and I would ask that the amendment of Mr. King be rejected by this committee and that we pass H.R. 6019 and provide enhanced opportunity for our local communities to answer the question of why 13 million children claim that they're being bullied in this country. And I yield back to the gentleman, call for a vote, and call for a vote on the underlying bill.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to make a statement or discuss this amendment? No? Okay. Without objection, though, I ask that Chairman Lamar Smith's statement be entered in the record in opposition to this amendment. The question is on the amendment. Those in favor say aye.
Mr. Chairman, a point of order. I believe that there's a point. There is a reservation on the table
yes,
yet.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my point of order.
Okay, thank you. Now, the question is on the amendment. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any other amendments at the desk? No other amendments? Okay. A reporting quorum being present, the question is on reporting the bill as amended favorably to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the bill is amended. It's reported favorably.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporating amendments adopted, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Members will have 2 days to submit their views. Okay, there being no further business before the committee, we are adjourned.